So that if motivation is getting a hold of an idea and taking this idea to its logical conclusion and not letting anything interfere with that, that's motivation. And we say a motivated person doesn't allow obstacles to show up in their life and doesn't allow for anyone to interfere with them, and is really highly directed towards a particular goal. So motivation is getting a hold of an idea and carrying it out. And we want to think of ourselves as motivated, and I think it comes from within. If that's what motivation is, inspiration is the exact opposite. Inspiration is when an idea gets a hold of you and takes you where you were originally intended to go in the first place. It's very different than motivation. The great playwright Arthur Miller, most of you had to read one of his plays at one time or another in high school or in college. Death of a Salesman being, of course, one of the most famous, The Crucible, and so on. Arthur Miller was passed away recently, but he was 88 years old, and he had another play on Broadway at the age of 88. And he was asked the question in an interview in the New York Times, are you working on another play? And his answer really intrigued me. He said, I don't know, but I probably am. Now, I think that that's really a very astute observation. When people ask me if I'm working on another book, I often say the same thing. I probably am. That there's something bigger. There's something that is greater in our lives. And when we connect to it, we allow it to take us where we were intended to go when we signed up for this whole visit in the first place, called our incarnation into being a human form for this little parentheses in eternity. Just a little parentheses in eternity. I have one of my very favorite observations of this subject about inspiration from a story written about a man named Wolfgang Amadeus, what? Mozart, of course. It's from an essay, Where Madness is Psyche's Only Nurse, it's called. It seems a would-be composer came to Mozart seeking his advice. How do I write symphonies, he asked. Mozart replied, well, you're young yet. I think you should begin by composing minuets. The young man was greatly annoyed and exclaimed, but you were writing symphonies when you were only 9 years old. Yes, Mozart responded, but I didn't ask anyone how to do it. Now, the writer of this essay goes on to say that the most agonizing thing about this little Mozart story is that Mozart was not speaking from inflation, but from simple, truthful modesty. The reason Mozart didn't have to ask anyone how to write symphonies is that symphonies presented themselves to him, invented, enlarged, produced all at once in what he described as lively dreams. Dreams that were so forceful that Mozart had to stop doing what he was doing, otherwise, and write out what he heard, almost as if something beyond Mozart's consciousness desired these symphonies to be written. Now, that is very, very powerful teaching, that these great symphonies that Mozart wrote presented themselves to him, and he couldn't stop it. Do you know, you don't have to be a Mozart to be in spirit. You can find your calling by just being willing to listen, by just being willing to be someone who knows that it may not be in the writing of a symphony that you're calling, that you're called to. It could be anything. It could be the adoption of a child. It could be the creation of something that you've known you wanted to write for your whole life. It could be opening up a business. It could be raising horses out in Montana. It could be anything that you are called to do. So that the awareness that I'm asking you to look at is that there is something that is calling you. And when an idea gets a hold of you, you get into this place of surrender, where you let go. In the recovery movement, we've always called this, you let go and what? And you let God. You allow this great spirit to be something that infuses you in such a way that it becomes this thing bigger than your life, that propels you into directions that you're willing to listen to. But you gotta change your awareness of yourself, as Maslow said. And one of the ways that you change your awareness of yourself is to understand a very simple premise. Think of an apple pie. Here's an apple pie, and this apple pie, you take this apple pie and you take a slice of this apple pie and you put it over here. And then you walk over to the slice and you say to the apple pie, the slice of apple pie, "What are you like? What are you like?" And the little slice of apple pie says, "I must be like what I came from." You wouldn't expect it to be pineapple. You wouldn't expect it to be cherry. You would expect it to be like what it came from, right? So why is it that we understand this, and yet we don't understand that we too must be like what we came from? We are pieces of God. We came from a divine source. We have to trust in our divinity. We have to understand that we are not this package of bones and skin encapsulating, these internal organs, that's not who we are. That's what we call the false self. It's an illusion. That who we really are is what we came from. And what we came from is eternal, it's infinite, it's kind, it's unlimited, it excludes no one. So that if we understand that we are really here as spiritual beings, just having a human experience, not the other way around. We're not human beings having a spiritual experience, it's the other way around. Our essence is our greatness, what we came from. We must be like what we came from. I've just taken up this new practice. It's called yoga. Now, I'm 65 years old, and I've decided that there are certain things that I was told that I couldn't do at earlier stages of my life that I've decided I'm taking on. I don't care what my age is or what anybody else has told. What Mrs. McConnell told me in the 6th grade at Marquette Elementary School in Detroit, that you don't have to come to art class. It's really not for you. You can go dribble basketballs maybe, but you don't want to come to art. This is because she saw some of my stick drawings that I was pretty proud of. And then there was Mr. Tubbs at Denby High School in Detroit, who, when I turned in my first drawing in drafting class, I didn't even know what drafting was. When I just signed, they threw me in there because the school was so overcrowded. It was my elective. And I turned in my first drawing, and he asked me the question, "Do you have a little sister?" Like in the 3rd grade, because she perhaps is the one that did this way. That was my whole view of my artistic ability. I'm out there painting now. I'm doing painting. And I'm also doing yoga, all right? And I've learned some things about myself in the process of doing this. Like the last time I touched my forehead to my ankles, I think I was 4 months old. And I'm getting closer. Now, I'm not there, all right? But I'm getting a little bit closer. Each time I do one of these poses, I find myself a little bit closer. And I had a sort of a semi-belief that I couldn't touch my toes while sitting up straight with my back straight up and sitting down and touch my toes without my knees bending. And I back straight up and sitting down and touch my toes without my knees bending. And I kept each day going in there and not being able to do that. The knees were up, and the instructor said, "You can do this." And I said, "Well, it doesn't seem like my body agrees with that, but it would be And so he came over and he said, now I'm going to show you that you really can do this. Now keep your back straight. And he took his foot and he went like this, down on my knees. And my knees went down and I was sitting up. And the first time I had ever been able to do, it was like a change in attitude, a shift, a belief system that I no longer was hanging on to. And that's what we have to do. It doesn't matter what your age is. It doesn't matter what your beliefs have been. It doesn't matter what other people have tried to convince you of in the past. When you move into spirit and have a knowing that I have the capacity to be able to do this, you leave behind the false self. And the false self is really nothing more than this ego. Look, you came from a divine place that is unlimited, that says you can be anything you put your attention on. And then you bought into a whole series of beliefs that were handed to you by very well-meaning people attempting to convince you that you had limitations, that you couldn't do this, that this wasn't possible. And I'd like to suggest to you that you took on something called an ego. E-G-O, an ego. You came in from divinity, you came in from a place of unlimited, you show up and you edged God out. E-G-O. And when you edge God out, it doesn't mean that you're sacrilegious. It doesn't mean that you're not a moral person. It means that you take on a belief system that says, who I am is no longer this infinite divine being who can step outside and observe this body and believe that he can make it do whatever I put my attention on and use it to have the same powers that is spoken about in the New Testament. Even the least among you can do all that I have done, and even greater things. It's within each and every one of us, except that we bought into an idea that who we are is what we have, who we are is what we do, who we are is what other people think I am, who I am is separate from everybody else, who I am is separate from what I would like to attract into my life, and who I am is separate from my source. And we believe in this separation, and we believe in this identity that who I am is what I have. So we start accumulating. We accumulate and accumulate and accumulate. The problem is that when you stop accumulating, and if who you are is what you accumulate, then you have no value as soon as your things start to disappear, as soon as they wear out, as soon as somebody else takes them, as soon as the government taxes them, as soon as any number of things. Who I am is what I do. If you no longer can do, then you aren't. You no longer exist. Who I am is my reputation, and we raise our children often to believe that what's most important is what other people think of you. Fit in. Do what you've been told to do. Do what the crowd does. Follow the herd. And you know what happens is what you step in when you follow the herd.